So I decided to take a deep dive into the legend of the Bell Witch. Through my many hours of research, I kept coming across this one thing that nobody else seemed to be addressing or seemed to even consider. So I'm going to tell you the story of the Bell Witch and what I think might actually solve the mystery of what really happened on that farm. Well, hello, my silky friends. It's Sunday. You know what that means. It's another Silky Sunday story time, except this one is not just going to be stories. It's going to be more research, and I hope I'm going to make you think a little bit. But if you are new to this channel, I'm Lily, and this is Silky Southern Tea. We talk about vintage crime, the paranormal, vintage mysteries, and all kind of things that make us go, Today's tea is hot cinnamon spice, and here is my favorite fancy sugar. All right, I hope you all had a great week. Yeah, this is the Halloween edition, so it's, spooky. Woo! Today's hat. Of course, it is a witch hat, because we're talking about the Bell Witch. The Bell Witch is the most traditional American haunting I think that there is. If I were to tell you the whole story, all the ins and outs of this, it would be an hour-long video, and we don't have time for that. I'm going to go over what is probably the most common variation on the story, because what I want to focus on are some people that may have been overlooked and some things that I would think someone would have brought up by now, and they haven't. So that is where I'm going to focus my story. So let's go all the way back when John Bell from North Carolina, he was 32 years old. He married Lucy, who was 12. And y'all know what I think about all that. But again, it was a different time. Apparently nobody looked down on it, but whatever. You do you, boo, I guess. John Bell was a prosperous farmer. They had land. As far as we know, there was no trouble in North Carolina. So it was really kind of weird that in the early 1800s, around 1804, he decided to take Lucy and the children that they had then and move to Tennessee, to a place called Red River. So this was just, kind of a wilderness. And he and some other folks from North Carolina came down to settle. This is red flag number one. I want to know why, if you've got a successful farm in North Carolina, you are leaving it all behind, and you're not a spring chicken, John. Why are you leaving all of that to come to Tennessee? I'm just saying, I think there might have been some sketchy business. As we'll see later, there were a lot of sketchy things about John Bell. But anyway, he moves to Tennessee, and he is very successful here. He is a member of the church. He's an upstanding citizen. Everybody likes John Bell and his family. Apparently, when he bought the land, he bought it from Kate Batts. Now, Kate and her husband had fallen on some kind of hard time. The general consensus is that Kate was not what you would call a genteel Southern woman. I mean, she was loud. She was the head of her household. Her husband was debilitated in some way. Different stories about that. So, one of the complaints is she just sang too loud in church. I think she was a kind of woman that just didn't fit in. She didn't fit the mold. And, was she a horrible person? There are no records to indicate that. As a matter of fact, most people say that whatever Kate's problems were, she did not hold grudges. And she wasn't a vengeful person, but she was kind of out there. And so, not everybody liked Kate. She was a nuisance to some. So when Kate ended up having to sell some land to John Bell out of necessity because her husband couldn't work, she later felt like he took advantage of her, and that land was actually worth a lot more than what he paid for it. Now, I don't know if that's true. I mean, John Bell was a shady character, so I don't know what kind of story he gave her, but at some point there was some bad blood, and then there seemed to be maybe some other dispute. Again, I'm going to skip over it. Just suffice to say that they were neighbors, and as neighbors do, sometimes they had squabbles over property, land, animals, whatever. So for 13 years, though, the Bells seemed to prosper. I mean, there wasn't anything going on other than some minor squabbles with Kate and whatever. But that was shortly to change. In the meantime, John and Lucy have a daughter named Elizabeth, and they called her Betsy. Betsy, along with her siblings, went to the local school, where they were taught by a Mr. Richard Powell. Now, let me give you some background on Mr. Powell, because this is important. Mr. Powell was a very educated man. He was the school teacher of the area and, was a scholar. But Mr. Powell had a secret life. Mr. Powell was actually married to a woman that was 18 years older than he was. And this is something that not everyone knew. That was kind of shady back in those days because it was usually the man that was older. So this marriage may kind of been like a marriage of convenience. She was older, she had property, she had money. Here comes this young guy. She's thinking, okay. But apparently the relationship wasn't like a really good one. So he kind of kept her hidden away. Not a lot of people even knew that. Betsy, who was very young at the time, is going to school, and the schoolhouse was actually adjacent to the Bell property, which was very large, so it's not like it was like right there. But Richard Powell would often come over to the Bell house and, kind of just hang, have dinner with the fam, whatever, during these formative years. As time passed, Betsy grew up, and I use that term loosely because she was like 14. She was still a kid. But as Betsy grew up, she became very beautiful, and Richard Powell started having an eye for Betsy. However, Betsy had an eye for Joshua Gardner, who was also a neighbor of hers. Mr. Powell was like 18 years older or more than Betsy. I mean, she was a kid, and he's way older. Joshua is her age. They grow up together, and they start getting sweet on each other. Well, it was somewhere around the year 1817 that it became very apparent to the two families that Betsy and Joshua were probably going to get married. Well, this didn't go over well with Mr. Powell. Now, these kind of details right here is what I'm talking about. They're not as pronounced in a lot of the studies, but hear me out. Things have been normal on the farm for years, except for the fact that John Bell was kind of ostracized. He had been a member of the Baptist church, but he had been excommunicated, which is unheard of. I mean, I'm just going to be real here, okay? The man had money. He could pay his tithes. He had land. He was somebody in the community. What must it have taken to say, John Bell, don't come back? The official reason is called usury. So I had to investigate that, and basically what that meant is that he had charged too much interest on some of his dealings, and people felt like it wasn't fair, and that was a big no-no. It wasn't like today where you can charge 3,000% interest and nobody cares. They're like, you know what, you're just not a good person charging these people all this interest. So that kind of does cast more of a light on the shadiness of John Bell. So did he make enemies? Oh, certainly, I'm sure he did. But as far as his farm and family, everything seemed to be fine until one day John is out and he's on his property. He sees what looks like this big wolf dog thing. In some versions, it is said to be a big black wolf, and in other versions, it's said to have the body of a very large dog-ish thing, but the head of a rabbit. Okay, so first, you're thinking, okay, he is doing too much drinking, smoking some peyote, something. But no, he actually takes out his gun and shoots it, as he would be a good shot. You had to be. And so when he goes up and he shoots it, and when it drops to the ground, he goes up on it and it disappears. I know, we get into that, was it a cryptid and shapeshifter? I don't know. You know, some stories say it was a regular wolf that disappeared. Whatever, there was a second animal that he shot it happened the same way. This is where the strangeness begins. After this, the family's sitting in the living room and they start hearing rocks thrown on the house. They go outside to look, there's nothing there. Fast forward a few days or weeks, and then it sounds like there's rocks being thrown inside the house and chains being pulled across the floor. You know, this was contained to the family at this time because, you know, you don't know what's going on, and it's just you and your family there, and it's late at night when the lights are out, and you don't want to tell the neighbors because, you know, witchcraft and all this kind of stuff, you don't even want to open that can of worms. They're not talking until the night that Betsy has something pulling her blankets off her bed in her sleep, and she wakes up and she's got like scratches and bruises, and as she's trying to get out of bed, she realizes her hair has been tied to the bedpost. So, you know, she's screaming. The family comes running, and, you know, they see this situation. Obviously, you know, she hasn't done this to herself. They finally come to the realization that this is a huge problem, and they need to let somebody know. So they start talking to their neighbors in the community and the preacher and everybody else to let them know, hey, something's going on over at the Bell farm. At first, you had a lot of doubters, as you can imagine. I mean, you know. So the Bells would let people come over, spend the night, just hang out at night, whatever. And pretty soon, you had all of these people in the community that were experiencing these same things. And there were written accounts and eyewitnesses of, yes, they heard chains rattling. They experienced slapping, you know, pinching, that kind of stuff. Now, I'm just saying, I ain't going to nobody's house to get pinched. I'm out. Yeah, but there was no internet, you know, no Netflix. What else you gonna do? Let's go over to the Bell house. See if we get shoved around a little. I don't know. And then they also started hearing this voice. At first it was a whisper. And when, you know, somebody said, "Who are you?" it identified itself as Kate. Well, the only Kate they knew of that would have a problem or would be doing all this stuff was Kate Batts, because, you know, like I said, there was some bad blood between. First of all, some people say that it couldn't have been Kate. She couldn't have been haunting because she was still alive at the time. But you're saying she's a witch, so what's that got to do with anything? I mean, use your head. But as time passed, the voice, it was like developing, and it would speak in sentences. Then it became a source of entertainment. Like, this is so crazy. I can't even. But people would come over to the house to talk to this spirit, who apparently was quite knowledgeable about the goings-on of their neighbors. Yeah, this was the gossip ghost. Well, that could be a TV show, couldn't it? Anyway, people would come over and ask questions about their neighbors. What are they doing? You know, what, etc., etc. And this ghost would answer their questions and give them the tea on what the other families were doing. Okay, come to find out, every bit of that was true. So I guess the church suspended their ban on witchcraft because apparently this witch was coming in and giving all the good gossip. So, you know, it can't be a sin, right? Can you believe this? There are so many details with this haunting and these different people that were eyewitnesses that said this happened and that happened. Like, you can go down the rabbit hole. This video would take forever to go through all of that. The Bell Witch became so famous for all of this tea she was spilling that it even gained the recognition of Andrew Jackson. There's a lot of controversy about this. They're saying he was president. He couldn't have come. No, he wasn't president during the years of the Bell Witch, and he actually owned a farm just up the road from the Bells. So he had land in the area, Was it possible that he actually was coming to visit? He had been in war with one of the Bell children. So, yes, completely plausible if you want to hear that story. Basically, Andrew Jackson got, scared out of town. He said that he would rather face the whole British Army than the Bell Witch. So, I don't know. That sounds like a little bit of a stretch, but who knows? Meanwhile, the Bells are having all these people over. This voice is getting stronger and stronger, and now it's getting deeper. They said at first it kind of sounded like a woman, and then the voice lowered over time. People were still getting punched, slapped, whatever, hair pulled, and Betsy Bell was one of the prime targets. Kate, the witch, said her mission in life was to kill John Bell. So again, this is fueling the fire in that they think this is a feud between John Bell and Kate Batts. Strangely enough, though, during this time, Richard Powell, remember him? He's the school teacher that has been a frequent visitor at the Bell house for years. He is watching this budding relationship between Joshua Gardner and Betsy Bell, and he doesn't like it. He's got his eyes on Betsy Bell for himself. Problem number one, she's a kid and she's not interested. Problem number two, Mr. Powell, you are still married. But it was during this time that the activity of the Bell house started, and it went on for several years. There's a cave involved, there's apparitions. But the bottom line is Betsy Bell kept getting all these messages that she shouldn't marry Joshua. Well, this was heartbreaking for her, and at first the couple just, ignored the whole thing, and they're determined to get married, but the activity increased so much that it really caused a wedge between them, and finally, they broke up. In the meantime, John Bell has been getting sicker and sicker. He's not sleeping well, he's weak, he's sick all the time, and sometimes it feels to him like there is a stick in his mouth crossways because he just really can't speak well. They can see that his health is deteriorating. They don't know, the doctors don't, nobody has a reason for this except for the Bell Witch. One night John is very sick, and he has this tonic that he's taken, and he tells the family, just go to bed, I'm gonna go to bed. He went upstairs, he went to sleep, and basically when they came to check on him in the morning, he had passed away. Upon investigation, they saw this little vial of black liquid beside the bed, and so they didn't know what it was, so they tested it and gave a little bit to the cat. Why does the cat have to get hurt? They give it to the cat dies. Oh, it's poison. Well, you couldn't have, given that to something else. I don't know. When the doctor, whomever, coroner, however they did it back then, when they come over, they tell them about the liquid, and they're like, okay, can I see the liquid? And one of the other Bell kids was like, oh no, I am so sorry, but I was angry when I realized it was poison. I threw it into the fireplace, and it made this big blue flame. Well, so then they couldn't test it. But just the description was highly suggestive of arsenic. Here we go with this arsenic once again. That was like if you wanted to off anybody in the 1800s, 1900s, you just used arsenic. Because in spite of all the deaths, apparently nobody was checking. Y'all, seriously. So, I'm thinking, wouldn't the first suspects be the family? Oh, but no, all of the family were exonerated because at the funeral, this is at the funeral where everybody's there, the Bell Witch talks and basically laughs and admits to the crime and said she is the one that gave the poison to John Bell. She was finally able to off her enemy. And so, nobody was really looked at in the family. So there you go. So John Bell dies. Betsy Bell has been plagued with all this. Now the witch has been telling her, you can't marry Joshua. They finally break up. And so John Bell dies in December of 1820, about 3 years into the whole Bell Witch saga. In 1821, Betsy is grieving, and, she's grieving for her dad, I guess, and she's grieving mostly for this lost relationship, her love. I mean, they're just not going to make it. So here she is in mourning, and who comes to hold her hand and comfort her? Why, it's her sweet school teacher, Richard Powell. So Mr. Powell comes over, and he's a shoulder to cry on, and then he starts reading her poetry and just trying, according to him, to give her some comfort in all of her grief. Horse feathers. That guy, he was trying to seduce Betsy Bell, and he finally did. 3 years later, after all of this, attention that she was getting from him, whether she actually fell for him or not, I don't know. The haunting stopped, all the voices, once she, decided she wasn't going to marry Joshua and John Bell died. I mean, ta-da! The haunting stopped. Strangely enough, after John Bell's death, Richard Powell's wife also passed away, leaving him free to marry Betsy. Imagine that. If that ain't suspicious, I don't know what is. But now the Bell Witch does say that she will return in 7 years to talk to one of the other family members. Just a brief little note. Yes, she did. There was another family member with conversations, and then she said she was going to come back in 100 years. And like I said, you can go down the rabbit hole on this one, because there were books written as early as in the 1850s, and then another whole account in the 1890s. So this was anywhere from 30 to 70 years after the actual events. But to this day, the Bell descendants still live in the area, some of them anyway. Okay, now bear with me. This is where we're going to get into the dark, okay? Because this is my theory on the Bell Witch haunting. Actually, somewhere in my research, there was an account that, and I can't remember the reason that Betsy Bell was put under hypnosis, but they said she was. As reported by the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library Archives, Betsy Bell was taken to a hypnotist to try to determine why she was a focus of the witch's attention. And, you start talking in those situations. And apparently, at some point, according to some accounts, Betsy confessed that her father, John Bell. Okay, I have to choose my words carefully here because YouTube won't let me say certain things. But Betsy Bell allegedly confessed to a room full of people that her father, John Bell, was being inappropriate with her for years. And this is just one theory, but number one, if that were true, and the Bell hauntings, which were observed by so many people, in my opinion, it could have been a trauma-based poltergeist situation, because, poltergeist activity is not actually a ghost. It is actually from a person who is very disturbed over something. So it makes you think. If you want to be thorough in possibilities, I would have to say that if Betsy Bell was in a situation where she felt unsafe and had this repeated trauma, when the haunting started, people were constantly coming over. I mean, that would alleviate that situation, because now you've got too many people, you've got too many witnesses, too much going on. That situation would not be allowed to continue. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, I would also say that perhaps her brother knew, perhaps the family knew. A big perhaps was that a cover for that little vial of arsenic that John Bell drank. I mean, wouldn't you want it to be tested officially? Wouldn't you want, if you are innocent, and all of a sudden there is this in the house, wouldn't you try to help investigations? Wouldn't you? Why would you destroy the evidence by throwing it in the fire? That's my question. I mean, was this a collaboration maybe with the people around Betsy to get her out of a bad situation? Did Betsy actually use that vial on John Bell? I mean, I don't know. I'm saying it's a possibility. In my opinion, and like I've said a million times, these opinions are just mine. I think it is a possibility that it was poltergeist activity due to trauma, and possibly Betsy or another family member got rid of the problem. Because the hauntings did slow way down and stop pretty much after the death of John Bell and the breakup of Betsy with Joshua. I don't know whether that's true or not. That is not my number one hypothesis here. First of all, taking advantage of your daughters was, I hate to say it, but it was very commonplace in rural areas, even way later than the 1800s. I mean, tons of stories. I don't know if it's because people are remote. I don't know what's wrong with people. Like, you're sick. But whatever. Could it have happened? Sure. Was it a common thing to happen? Absolutely. Even at that, I still don't think that was the cause of the haunting. Let me tell you why. John Bell was present, so it seems like he was an observer of all of these things as much as anybody else. Strangely enough, you know who wasn't present? Richard Powell. Richard Powell was never there as much as he visited the house during these disturbances. Now let's back up a bit, because before all of this happened, there were two incidents where different school children would be at the schoolhouse at an unexpected time, like later in the evening, have turned back to forgot something at school, whatever. And in two instances, Richard Powell was observed to be in a back room of the schoolroom with a candle, chanting, saying things in a language that no one understood. Now, when asked about it, he would just be like, oh, that's your imagination. You didn't hear that. So, a lot of people believe that he was an occultist. Several of the kids actually accused him of witchcraft. And when I say accused, back in those days, that was a big deal. So I wouldn't say they actually called it that. They probably just reported the story. I don't think they were trying to get him in trouble necessarily. I mean, he was a popular person as well. But they related these stories, and it's the kind of thing that made people go, But after the Bell Witch thing started, that kind of stole the show. Now, some people said Kate Batts couldn't have done this because she was alive at the time. That doesn't mean anything. As far as Kate Batts being a witch, there is absolutely zero reports that she knew anything about it. I mean, was she upset about the land and his practices? Yeah, but there was other people that were too. I mean, it seems pretty convenient that the witch said it was Kate. This sounds like you're trying to blame somebody. Now, here is what I've never heard anybody mention. Nobody takes into consideration if this was an actual witch, as the entity said, it would easily be explained by that person, whoever it was, to simply astral project. I mean, and I know if you don't know what that is, I mean, astral projection is not a theory. I mean, it is a basic practice of occult practitioners. That is where your soul leaves your body and goes somewhere else, and you can see and hear other conversations And yeah, there's a whole lot to it. Like I said, it's pretty standard. So even though people may not have understood what was going on, a occult practitioner at that time certainly would have. A witch, and I know there's different kind of witches. So that's why I'm saying somebody who was deep into the occult would know how to do that. And because this entity, when you think about ghosts and ghost hunters, like they spend hours trying to get like one little EVP, one little knock, one little something. This entity was out there wilding, having full conversations, being sarcastic, singing songs, could quote sermons. I mean, could tell you what's going on in the house down the street. This was not normal. This, in my opinion, had to be a human act. So I believe that the Bell Witch was someone who was astrally projecting. Now, my first guess would be Richard Powell, because first of all, he had been caught in some weird circumstances. He was very educated, and he had an agenda. He wanted Betsy Bell, and he did everything he could to make sure that happened, including the death of John Bell, because who is going to stand up and help her resist if the father's dead? I mean, the patriarch, you take out the patriarch of the family, blame it on Kate, okay? Because nobody likes Kate anyway. Let's just blame it on her. Let her take the rap. So, I mean, there are other stories as well about they found Indian bones in the fields. Was it, partially it was already ground that shouldn't have been disturbed. A lot of different things. But in my opinion, the characteristics of the Bell Witch and everything that the Bell Witch was able to do during that time far exceeds a haunting. And so, I've talked myself voiceless. But anyway, that's my belief. I believe it was real. Some of the family members now say the curse has gone all these generations. Again, if you are really interested in this haunting, take a deep, deep dive. But you will be there for days, like I was. And, that's basically what I came up with. So, tell me what you think. I mean, do you think that the haunting was a ghost? Was it a witch? Was it astral projection? And who do you think it was? Do you think it was family that killed John Bell? Or was it really the witch? I don't know. I don't know, but there's a lot of possibilities out there. And I hope you enjoyed this. We are in spooky season, so there you go. I'm going to need a lot more tea to wash down this story. But anyway, I hope you have a great week. And for goodness sakes, stay silky.